Arizona Territory, 1882. The first time Nolan Prescott laid eyes on the woman who would turn his world upside down, she was pointing a stolen Colt .45 at his chest. He had been riding south along the Gila River, chasing rumors of stolen cattle, when the dust from his horse's hooves hadn't even settled before she stepped out from behind a mesquite tree with her boots planted wide and her jaw set like stone. "Drop the rifle," she snapped. Her voice was low, scratchy, like someone who had not slept in days. Nolan raised his hand slowly, one brow lifting just a hair. "Ma'am," he said, calm as a quiet creek, "that is my horse you're holding at gunpoint." "I do not care," she said. "I just need the canteen and whatever food you got." She looked like she had crawled through hell. Dirt streaked her cheeks, her dark hair was tangled and knotted at the ends, and the thin linen shirt clung to her like it had been soaked and dried a dozen times over. "You planning on shooting me?" Nolan asked, his voice steady. Her eyes flicked to his rifle, then back. "Not unless you make me." "Well," he said, "that would be a shame, because I was just about to offer you water and food without the gun part." She blinked. The barrel lowered a hair. "I got jerky," he added, "and a clean blanket. Looks like you could use both." The woman hesitated. Then finally her arms dropped. The gun sagged at her side, and just like that her knees buckled. Nolan caught her before she hit the dirt. Her name was Sadie Zimmerman. She told him that much once she came to, inside the small rock shelter Nolan had led her to for shade. He had fetched water from the river, and she had gulped it like someone days past desperate. "I did not mean to pull a gun on you," she muttered, not quite meeting his eyes. I have had a bad week." "What happened?" Nolan asked, not pushing, just letting the question hang there. Sadie wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Started with my husband leaving me for dead in a canyon near Yuma. Took the horse, the wagon, and left me with 2 small children." Nolan's brows furrowed. "Where are they now?" "I left him with a woman I trust in Tucson. They are safe. I made sure of that before I came looking for him." Her voice cracked. "I ain't no mother if I do not make sure of that." Nolan leaned back on his hands. "So you were tracking the bastard?" "I was, until I ran out of water." He studied her. The sun was setting, painting her face in gold and orange. She looked tired, but underneath all that grime and exhaustion, there was steel in her spine. She was trouble, that much was clear, but not the kind that harmed, the kind that came from surviving too much and still standing. "What's your plan now?" he asked. Sadie looked toward the horizon. "I guess I just keep walking." Nolan shook his head slowly. "Not without a horse, you are not." She looked at him then, really looked. "Why are you being kind to me?" he shrugged. "You are my kind of woman." Her brow lifted. "What kind is that?" "The kind that fights her way through hell and still chooses to protect her children." Sadie blinked, not used to kindness without strings. He saw that in her face. Then she looked down at her hands and whispered, "I ain't nothing but trouble." Nolan leaned forward. "So am I." Nolan had no business getting involved. He was a cowboy, not a bounty hunter. But when Sadie told him her husband's name and what he had done leaving her and the children, stealing every cent they had, and running off with a saloon girl, Nolan made a decision. "You are not going after him alone," he said, packing up his saddle bags the next morning. Sadie crossed her arms. "I do not need a savior." "I am not trying to save you," he said. "I am just not going to let a man like that walk free while the woman he left behind has to beg for water." She watched him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but if we find him, I get the first punch," he smiled. "Deal." They rode together for 2 days. The trail was dry and rough, but Sadie never complained. She slept beneath the stars with her back to the fire and her hand on her pistol. Nolan noticed she never really rested. On the 3rd night, when the fire crackled low, Nolan handed her the blanket he had been using. You are shivering, he said simply. Sadie hesitated, then took it. Their fingers brushed. She looked up, startled by the warmth in his eyes. You do not even know me, she said. I know enough. And what is that? That you are stronger than you know. And you deserve better than what he gave you. She blinked fast, turned her face toward the fire. But not before he saw her eyes shine. They found the husband in a border town called La Estrella, drunk and loud in a saloon. Sadie stepped through the doors first, boots heavy on the plank floor. He saw her, went pale. Sadie, she did not say a word, just drew back her fist and hit him square across the jaw. He went down hard. Nolan watched from the doorway, arms crossed. When the saloon keeper started to step forward, Nolan said, "She is just taking back her dignity." "Let her." Sadie stood over her husband's groaning form. "You left me to die," she said coldly. "You left our children. You do not get to walk away from that." Then she turned and walked out. They rode north the next day toward Tucson. Sadie was quiet for a long while until she finally said, "I am going to get a little land, maybe raise chickens. I just want peace." "You deserve it," Nolan said. She looked at him. "You heading back to your ranch?" "I was, but I think I might know a better direction." Sadie raised a brow. "And what direction is that?" He looked at her, his voice quiet. "Wherever you are." She blinked, caught off guard. "You sure about that?" "I have never been more sure of anything." And for the first time since he met her, Sadie smiled. A real one. By the time they reached Tucson, Nolan had already gone into town and bought a second horse. He gave it to her without a word, just handed over the reins. She stared at it, then at him. "You do not give up, do you? Not when I find something worth holding on to." She stepped closer. "You think I'm worth that?" He shrugged. "You are my kind of woman, Sadie Zimmerman." And finally, she leaned in. Their kiss was quiet, sure, and full of everything neither of them had said out loud. It was not rescue. It was choice. And it was just the beginning. The cabin sat on the outskirts of Tucson, tucked behind a crooked line of cottonwoods that leaned into the wind like old men trading secrets. It wasn't much. One room, a slanted roof, and a door that stuck if you didn't lift it just right, but the walls held. The land behind it dipped into a dry wash where quail scattered at the sound of boots. Sadie stood in the doorway, arms folded across her middle, watching Nolan pull the saddle from his horse. Dust clouded around him as he worked, the late sun turning the air gold. She didn't speak until he'd set the bridle on the rail. "You don't have to stay and fix fence posts," she said, voice even. "I can pay someone come morning." "You could," he replied, patting the gelding's flank, "but you'd end up doing half the work anyway." She didn't argue that. The land had been in disuse for years, and bore the signs boards warped from sun, weeds tangled knee-high, a shed roof near collapse. She'd traded sewing for it with a widow who couldn't hold it alone anymore. What Sadie lacked in money, she made up for in grit. He joined her on the porch, wiping his hands on a kerchief. "You get the stove working. Get it hot enough and it'll cook," she said. "Just can't use the front right burner. Flame jumps too high." "Reckon I'll take a look after supper." She angled her head, studying him. "You always this helpful?" "No," he said, eyes steady. "Just with folks who don't ask for help and need it anyway." Sadie looked away, jaw tight. "I don't want anyone thinking I can't handle my own life." "Who said you can't?" he said softly. "I'm just offering a hand, not tying you down." She didn't answer right away. The quiet between them stretched long, filled only by the creak of the windmill and the groan of a settling board beneath their boots. Inside, the children were asleep in the back corner on straw mattresses Sadie had stuffed herself. She'd made them quiet with stories about lizards that wore boots and coyotes that played tricks on the moon. Nolan had listened from outside the door, not intruding, but not leaving either. Sadie finally turned back to him. "You any good with a hammer?" "Decent," he said. "Better with a fence line." You'll find the fences out back, she said. 2 are leaning, one's missing a whole section. I'll start with that, she paused. You can stay in the shed once it's patched. I won't have folks talking. Nalan's mouth lifted at the corner. I'll earn my keep. The next morning, the sky was overcast, thick with the smell of coming rain. Nalan worked without complaint, digging post holes by hand. Sadie brought him a tin cup of coffee before noon and watched him from the shade. You always work this steady? She asked. I was raised that way, he said. My father didn't believe in leaving a job half done. Mine didn't believe in staying, she said, not looking at him. He didn't fill the silence. Just stood, rolled his shoulders and moved to the next post. That night, after the children were asleep again, Sadie sat on the porch with a sewing basket in her lap. Nalan joined her, a fresh scrape on his palm from the coop door. You planning to raise chickens out here? He asked. Soon as I can build a pen that won't fall over in the wind. She threaded a needle, fingers steady. You ever do anything besides ranch work? Drove freight once, hated it. Too much sitting, not enough sky. She glanced at him. You and the sky seem to get along. Always have, he said. It doesn't lie. Sadie stitched in silence for a time, then said, My boy Micah, he started asking where his father went. I told him the truth won't help him sleep at night. Nalan tilted his head. What you tell him? That his father was gone and I was here. Nalan didn't speak for a long moment. Then, quiet as the breeze moving through the cottonwoods, he said, That's enough. Sadie's hands paused over the fabric. You think so? I do. She looked at him then, eyes catching the faint light from the window behind them. You're not what I expected. I'm not trying to be anything. That's what makes it strange, she said. Most men come with angles. You come with quiet. He didn't respond, just leaned back in the chair, eyes watching the stars blink to life. I'm not looking for someone to fix me, she said after a while. I need someone who knows how to stand beside me when the wind's high. I don't fix people, he said. I mend fence lines and cook a decent breakfast. The rest, I leave to the ones who know what they need. She set the sewing aside, the needle still threaded. You cook breakfast too, huh? When I've got a skillet and no one standing in my way. Sadie laughed then, not loud but real. He turned his head toward her. That the first time I've heard you do that, might be, she said. Might not be the last. They didn't touch, didn't need to. The air between them was changing, slow and certain like water carving rock, and neither of them looked away. The roof of the shed held through the rain, though the west corner still dripped slow and steady onto a warped floorboard. Nalan had tacked a strip of oilcloth along the seam, but the wood was too far gone in places. He'd fix it, just like he'd fix the chicken pen and reinforce the back gate without being asked. Sadie found him behind the barn near dusk, sleeves rolled, sawing clean through a split beam. She stood there a long moment before speaking. You always build like you're staying. Nalan didn't look up. I build like it ought to last. She leaned against the rail, arms crossed. You think you're staying? I haven't seen anything worth leaving for. Her jaw tightened, but not in anger. You ever wonder what people'll say? A man living out back, helping raise another man's children. I've stopped caring what people say, he replied. They don't carry my name or lie awake in my boots. Sadie rubbed her thumb against her palm. Micah's been asking why you're still here. He watches you like he's trying to decide if you'll vanish one morning. I won't, Nalan said, setting the saw down. But you're the one he needs to believe, not me. She turned toward the house, then looked back. He's not the only one wondering. Nalan brushed wood dust from his arms. I'm not here out of pity, Sadie. I didn't think you were. I'm here because the ground feels steady when I wake up near you. She didn't answer, but he could see the breath catch in her throat. Later that night, after the children were asleep, and the sky stretched wide with stars, Sadie stepped out of the house with a quilt draped over her shoulders. Nolan had just finished banking the coals in the fire pit outside the shed. "You ever think about settling before?" she asked, her voice lower than usual. "I thought I had once," he said, "but it was the wrong place and the wrong person." Sadie sat on the stump across from him. What happened? She didn't want a man who came home with dirt on his hands. Wanted polished boots and a town job. I wasn't made for that. You think I'm made for any man? I think you're made for a life where you don't have to fight every day just to be seen. She looked down at the quilt, fingers tightening near the edge. "I've spent years learning how not to need anyone. I've spent years learning when to offer what I've got without expecting anything back." They sat in silence for a long while, the fire dying down to reddish embers. A coyote called from somewhere far off, long and low. "I used to believe love was about safety," she said. "About someone coming in and fixing all the broken things." Nolan's voice was quiet. "And now I think it's just showing up and staying, even when nothing's clear." He reached forward, laid a hand gently over hers. "I've got no promises to sell you, but I'll stay if you'll let me." Sadie looked at their hands, then at his face. "If you stay, I won't ask you to leave." The next morning, she handed him the key to the house. Didn't say anything, just pressed it into his palm as she passed him the coffee. He didn't ask what it meant. He already knew. The wind shifted in early March, bringing with it the faint scent of orange blossom from groves downriver and the promise of heat that would stretch long into summer. The kind of heat that made would split in the shade and kept folks quiet through the hottest part of the day. Sadie stood beneath the arbor Nolan had built from salvaged beams, her arms elbow-deep in dishwater she'd hauled from the well. The children were chasing a lizard near the edge of the garden plot, their laughter carried on the dry wind. Nolan sat sharpening a drawknife on the porch step, sleeves rolled to the elbow, eyes focused on steel. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked, not looking up from the basin. Nolan didn't answer right away. The scrape of stone against blade slowed, then stopped altogether. "I think about what needs doing tomorrow. After that, I see where my boots take me." Sadie rinsed a plate and set it on the drying cloth. "You don't plan past the next sunrise." "I used to," he said. "Didn't make a difference when someone else changed the road on me." She dried her hands on her apron and moved to lean against the porch post. "I want to plant corn, maybe some beans. I figure I can trade half the yield for flour and salt come fall." He set the blade aside and met her eyes. "You'll get a better return if you dig proper terraces over that slope near the coop." "I don't know how," she admitted. "I've only ever grown food enough for a few mouths. Never worked land like this." "I'll show you," he said. "We'll mark the lines tomorrow." Sadie nodded, then glanced toward the children. "Micah's been sleeping through the night again." "That's good," Nolan said. "He only does that when he feels safe." She paused. "I reckon it's not just the locked door making the difference." He stood up slowly, brushing sawdust from his trousers. "What are you trying to say, Sadie?" "I'm saying you've woven yourself into this place. Into us." Nolan stepped closer, the space between them narrowing with the quiet surety of a man who knew when not to speak. "I'm not asking you to promise anything," she said, "but I want to know if you've let yourself feel it too." He took her hand, calloused palm meeting hers without hesitation. "You think I've been fixing fences and building arbors just for the view?" She narrowed her eyes, but he saw the corner of her mouth tug upward. "Could be you're just handy." "Could be," he said. "But it's more likely I saw something worth setting roots for." Sadie's throat worked as she swallowed. "I never thought I could have something soft again, something steady." "You haven't had steady," he said. "You've had to carry too much on your own. Maybe it's time someone carried with you." She looked away, but her fingers tightened on his. You do that. Stand beside me through the hard years too. I wouldn't be here otherwise. The screen door creaked open behind them. The little girl, Emma, peered out, thumb tucked in her mouth. Mama, can we eat supper now? Sadie glanced down at her, then back to Nolan. You hungry? He nodded once. Always. Later, after the children were tucked into quilts and the oil lamp burned low, Nolan sat at the kitchen table carving a handle for the broken garden hoe. Sadie cleaned out the hearth, scraping ash into a pan. The silence between them was companionable, filled with the rhythm of ordinary things. You ever think about marriage? She asked, not turning around. Nolan set down the knife and looked at her back. I do. She straightened slowly, brushing soot from her skirt. You think it's something two people like us could make work? I think it is, he said. Because we've already learned how to weather storms and still sit at the same table. She turned then, a flicker of something raw behind her eyes. I never wanted to need anyone again. You don't, Nolan said gently. But wanting that's different. Sadie walked toward him, each step deliberate, and stopped just before his chair. I want you, Nolan Prescott. He stood, cupped her face with rough hands that had shaped wood and lifted her children and never once asked for anything in return. You've got me, he said. For as long as you'll have me. She leaned into him, forehead resting against his chest, and whispered, That's exactly how long I want. And in that quiet house, beneath the weight of shared days and the promise of more to come, they stood with nothing between them but breath and choice. The spring rains came late that year, falling in short, sharp bursts that turned the hard, packed ground pliable and brought a flush of green to the hills beyond the wash. Sadie stood in the freshly dug furrows with her skirts pinned up, pressing corn into the dark soil while Nolan followed behind with a hoe, pulling dirt over each seed. You plant like you've done it before, she said, brushing hair from her brow with the back of her wrist. I watched my mother, Nolan replied. She had a way of making things grow whether the ground wanted it or not. Sadie looked out over the rows. You think this land will give back? It already is. She didn't answer, but he saw the way her shoulders eased, how her hands moved with more certainty as they worked. By noon, the sun had cut through the clouds and the scent of wet earth rose thick around them. Emma played at the edge of the field, her doll tucked into a sling Sadie had sewn from an old flour sack. Micah trailed after the hens, checking each nest for eggs with the seriousness of a boy given real responsibility. That evening, Nolan brought an old tin box from the shed. It was dented and rusted along the edges, something he'd kept with him through years of trail work and campfires. He set it on the table while Sadie dried the supper dishes. I was going to wait, he said, but you're not a woman who needs ceremony. She turned, drying cloth in hand. What's that? He opened the lid and took out a silver ring, simple and worn smooth at the edges. My mother gave this to me when I left home. Said when I found someone who looked at me like I'd been carved for her, I'd know what to do with it. Sadie stared at it, then at him. No smile, no surprise, just a stillness that went deep. You're sure? I've never had steadier hands. She stepped forward and held out her left hand. Then put it on me before I change my mind and make you work another season before earning it. The metal slid over her finger like it belonged there. She looked up at him, eyes quiet but full. You'll marry me? He asked. I already have, she said. Everything else is just catching up. They wed on a clear Sunday morning beneath the sycamore near the edge of the wash. The preacher from town came out in a borrowed buggy, and the neighbor woman who traded the land to Sadie brought a basket of biscuits and pickled peaches. Nolan wore his cleanest shirt. Sadie wore the blue calico she'd kept wrapped in muslin in the bottom of a trunk since before her children could walk. Micah held Nolan's hand tight during the vows. Emma curled up in Sadie's arms and fell asleep before the last prayer was said. Afterward, they ate in the shade while the wind moved soft through the trees. No music, no dancing, just bread passed by hand and stories shared low, the kind that held the shape of long roads and harder choices. That night, with the children asleep and the house quiet, Sadie sat on the edge of the bed and unlaced her boots. "I didn't think I'd ever be a wife again," she said. "Not like this." "You're not," Nolan said, kneeling in front of her. "You're my partner." "That's different." She touched his face, thumb brushing the line of his jaw. "I can breathe with you beside me. Then we'll keep breathing together." She leaned into him, and they stayed that way a long time, the lamp burning low, the night pressing soft against the windows. They built the years slow and steady. The corn came in strong, and the beans climbed the trellises Nolan built by hand. The chickens laid regular, and Emma grew tall, chasing them through the yard. Micah took to learning carpentry from Nolan, and by the time he turned 12, he could sand a board smooth as river stone. Sadie kept sewing for neighbors, but only when she wanted to, and Nolan took in work where it came, never gone more than a day or two. They added a second room to the house and a porch swing where Sadie liked to sit with her feet tucked under her, watching the sky turn from gold to deep violet. They didn't speak often of the past. It had shaped them, sure, but it didn't speak for who they became together. One evening, after the children had gone off to sleep and the windmill creaked in the stillness, Nolan poured 2 mugs of coffee and brought one out to Sadie, who was watching the moon rise over the far hills. She took the mug, fingers brushing his. "You happy?" He sat beside her, their shoulders touching. "Every morning I wake up and see you breathing next to me, I know I've got more than I ever asked for." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You're the best thing I never went looking for." They rocked slow, the porch boards groaning beneath them. The land was quiet, the children safe, the house warm. And in the hush of that Arizona night, with nothing but time ahead, Nolan and Sadie Prescott held onto each other like they'd weather every season together, and they would.